Hello, I'm Arif Ansari. Coming up in the Northwest. The Oldham West and Royton by-election, Jim McMahon post Jeremy Corbyn's first victory as Labour leader. UKIP stamped its feet over postal voting. Stuart Pollett will be speaking to the new MP.
Yes, it's all change here in Royton Town Centre. That was UKIP's campaign headquarters, but it's no change in the party who's representing this town. We'll be talking to Jim McMahon.
And here in the studio we have Paul Nuttall, UKIP's deputy leader and North West Euro MP, and Lisa Nandy, the Labour MP for Wigan. She's the shadow cabinet member for energy and climate change. So Lisa, at one point Labour MPs seemed to be quite worried about the by-election. That's what they were telling us as they were going up and visiting. In the end, they had nothing to worry about.
Well, I went to visit and I felt it was incredibly positive, partly because Jim was the candidate, partly because people were supporting Labour. I think there was a big split between the national media and local media. I think local media understood that people were very positive about us. National media, perhaps not so much. But
and
we saw the result.
Between local and national politicians as well, perhaps?
No, I don't think so. I think that what you saw was a very united front from Labour about the issues that matter in Oldham. I don't mean in that sense, but what I mean is some of the politicians visiting were genuinely worried about the outcome. Well, we always take by-election seriously. We take every election seriously, and you never take any votes for granted.
And Paul, a disappointing night for UKIP?
Not really. I mean, I'm not surprised. I mean, I wrote an internal party paper when this by-election was called. I said that the party would struggle to get 25%. I thought that we would finish a strong second, which we have. And all we've got to do is just stay in the game for now, because we know politics in the future is coming onto our turf with the EU referendum. Well,
we'll take a look at the result in Oldham West and Royton. In the end, Labour had nothing to worry about. The party actually increased its share of the vote by 7% to 62%. UKIP nudged up by 3%, but were not even close. The Conservatives fell away sharply, while the Liberal Democrats and Greens failed to get the necessary 5% to keep their deposit. That meant Labour's majority was almost 39%. But as Stuart Pollett now reports, UKIP cried foul over the margin of victory.
Polling day in Oldham West and Royton. Two parties preparing for a close fight, which turned out to be anything but.
And I do hereby declare that Jim McMahon is duly elected as the Member of Parliament for Oldham West and Royton.
Labour won a majority of more than 10,000 and increased its share of the vote.
Genuinely, the result is quite staggering, I think. I never imagined that I would be standing here as an MP for the town that I live in, that I love.
In the middle of a turbulent period for the party, the key to Labour holding on here appeared to be two things. One, a good, strong local candidate in Jim McMahon, and secondly, their core vote holding up in the Asian areas of this constituency.
Well, I voted Labour.
And you, Madam?
Well, I did the same because Jim, I've read all about what he's done for Oldham.
I voted for the man, not for the party.
I feel like it's the only person who could get through to us, really.
UKIP have put a lot of time and a lot of money into trying to win this seat. Today on polling day, there are almost as many UKIP canvassers as there are voters. Why UKIP?
Well, what's been happening before wasn't working.
I like Nigel Farage and the way he talks. He's straight talking.
They might have persuaded some voters, but nowhere near enough. UKIP's leader claimed fraudulent postal votes in the seat's Asian areas were partially responsible.
Labour won. I mean, this is not sour grapes. Labour won. Fair and square. Fine. But when you see what we saw in those boxes last night, you have to ask yourself a question about British democracy. And I think not to say that would be wrong.
I don't think there is the scale of potential fraud here, which seemed to be claimed certainly initially by Nigel Farage and others. There may be some substance to some of it. Past experience suggests that is possible, but it's certainly not on a scale that could have affected this result fundamentally.
Certainly Labour's Asian vote did remain loyal.
I like Labour. Majority, I think, is Labour.
I think Labour, they're doing for ordinary people.
Labour.
Why Labour?
Like it.
And Labour very much liked this result. one which everybody in the party is keen to embrace.
Well, let's go to Stuart, who is in the constituency. And it sounds, Stuart, as if Jim McMahon is busy celebrating, perhaps.
I'm afraid, yes, Arif, he's not going to make it in time for our scheduled interview this morning. And if he had have been here, he'd have noticed a very different scene, because I was here on polling day on Thursday, and this little area of Royton Town Centre was absolutely swarming with UKIP canvassers, with MEPs, party dignitaries. They were based in the building there, and many of them were very, very confident. A lot of them were coming up to me and saying, oh, it's going to be close. We think that, we're not necessarily going to win, but we're going to be within 1,000, 2,000 votes. As you can see, as soon as the election finished, everything's taken down, nice quiet here this morning. And unfortunately, Jim McMahon won't be with us, but he will be getting down to business, I'm sure, as the region's newest MP.
He will indeed. Stuart, thank you very much indeed for being there. Now, we have Dr. Rob Ford with us from the University of Manchester, an expert on the UK Independence Party. Rob, this result, was it good for Labour or bad for UKIP?
I'd say a little bit of both, actually. It was definitely a lot better than expected going into this result, and expectations are clearly very important because this is being treated as a massive win for the Labour Party. It's actually pretty much in line with the kind of by-election results that Ed Miliband saw early in his leadership, and on the other side of the aisle that William Hague and Ian Duncan Smith saw in theirs. But the expectation was Labour would drop sharply. They didn't. That definitely takes a lot of heat off the national leadership. As far as UKIP are concerned, it is a major disappointment. I mean, they believed going into this seat that they had, as it were, the ideal Labour Party leader to campaign against. Their campaign was heavily focused on Jeremy Corbyn and his views.
They said they were going to get close?
Yeah. They said they were going to get close, and they needed really to get close to make, sort of say, a double-digit gain in vote share, to make credible the argument that they've been making that they are breathing down Labour's neck in the north. Now, this was not the ideal seat for them demographically. They said so, and I agree. But they should really have been posting a larger vote gain than we saw if they genuinely are going to be challenging and making Labour MPs nervous in more favourable seats.
Paul, what went wrong?
Well, I mean, I think that the national media talked up our chances more so than us, actually. Well, and I think that they were desperate.
No, come off it, Paul. You were very clear. No, because I can actually play you Nigel Farage at the start of his campaign, if I wanted to, in which he said that he hoped you'll certainly push him close, might even cross the line.
Well, as I say, I wrote an internal party document which said that we would struggle to get 25% in this seat because it was demographically very difficult for us, probably one of the most difficult seats in the whole of the north of England. But there will be a seat which will come along in the near future, which will be demographically more favourable to UKIP, and I guarantee it won't be long before we're taking seats off Labour up here in the north of England.
Even on the night of the election, before the votes came in, you were still saying that you were going to do well. You haven't done well. You didn't even get close. It's not as if it's not that people are expecting you to win. It's the fact that you're pretty much in. The gap was massive.
Well, yeah, but equally at the same time, I didn't expect to see what I witnessed on that night with postal voting, and I'm a veteran of by-elections. I've been at the centre of over 20 over the past 10 years.
And you've complained about postal voting several times.
And I have, yeah, but equally, what is wrong with that? If something's wrong, it's wrong, and if it hasn't changed, it will remain.
Nothing's wrong with it.
To be wrong.
The point being that you knew that problem existed, so that's not an explanation for the issue.
But we've never witnessed a situation whereby boxes were being opened and they were 95 to 100% for one political party, and that's Labour. And, the only way we're going to solve this problem, and first we've got to admit there's a problem.
Well, and there is a problem, Paul, with your party in terms of appealing to the North, because you did not get close. Let's just remind ourselves about Nigel Farage, because I spoke to the UKIP leader just before the election and asked if the party had a lot riding on the result.
A hell of a lot, yes. I mean, I think that 4 million people went out and voted UKIP on May the 7th. And that's 4 million disappointed people, very disappointed that we didn't get more representation in Parliament. This is, in a sense, our way of re-engaging with that 4 million and perhaps many more. And I genuinely think that in the north of England, from Labour, we've got huge potential, and I believe we'll show that with the result here on Thursday.
And, of course, that didn't happen. A hell of a lot riding on it, in his words.
Yeah, a hell of a lot to stay in the game. And we've stayed in the game, and in the long term, politics is going to come onto our turf with the EU referendum. But equally, I do want to say this, and I will go back time and time again. Our electoral system with postal voting on demand is broken. It allows for rotten wards. And we've seen it in Tower Hamlets, we've seen it in Birmingham, we've seen it in Slough, And actually, and I'm going to say this, and it might be politically incorrect to say it, they are predominantly wards which are South Asian, okay? And what we're doing is we're importing an alien form of electoral practice, which might go down well in Dakar, might go down well in Karachi, but it has no place in our political system.
Do you want to pick up on that?
I just think that's just profoundly offensive, and it's no wonder then that it's no wonder then that people aren't voting for UKIP.
It's the truth.
All you've got to offer is to accuse people and the system that represents them of being bent every time you fail to make the case.
The Electoral Commission last year. The Electoral Commission said so last year.
Has UKIP made an official complaint about what happened in Oldham?
We'll be looking at the evidence tomorrow at our National Executive Committee.
Sorry, Paul, you just made a really serious accusation, not just about politics, but actually about people and the way that people behaved in Oldham.
Certain communities,
in recent weeks.
There is a problem.
And yet you haven't even made an official complaint. It tells me
there is a problem with postal voting fraud in serious communities.
It tells me that you absolutely
in certain communities,
nothing
the Electoral Commission said so last year.
And yet you haven't made an official complaint. You've got absolutely nothing to offer to the electorate.
Well, we'll see if we make an official complaint.
And that's what became really apparent during the course of this by-election. That the campaign that Nigel Farage was just talking about was based on attacking Jeremy Corbyn, attacking Jim McMahon, who's a well-liked and well-respected figure in Oldham.
And you weren't attacking our candidates. You weren't putting out leaflets in UKIP colours.
Hold on a second, because Lisa, I do want to pick you up on this postal vote issue, because while Paul might be exaggerating the extent of the problem, there is an issue there.
I'm not exaggerating.
And that has been explained by the Electoral Commission before. And why don't we tighten up on postal votes?
Well, I think that's right. I mean, one of the things that has come up through many, many elections and by-elections is that we need to make sure that people aren't open to abuse or manipulation, particularly where they don't understand the electoral system particularly well. We need to make sure that that happens, particularly for older communities as well. But, you know, if there is a problem that UKIP has evidence of, then they should make a complaint to the Electoral Commission, who would be able to investigate it. And as I understand it, they've done absolutely nothing of the sort. The truth is, they fought a poor campaign with a candidate who wasn't from the area and didn't know anything about the issues. And at the end of the day, Labour has a strong track record of delivering for people in Oldham, and that's why we did so well in this by-election.
Just to stick with the issue of postal votes for a second, the victims here are the Asian voters themselves who may be being put under pressure to vote in a certain way. It's not UKIP that are the victims, it's the Asian voters themselves. And on that basis, why isn't more being done to tighten up on this and say you don't need a postal vote unless you actually need one? Otherwise, you can use the secret ballot.
Look, I don't think we should deny people postal votes based on their ethnic background. I think we should be making sure that people have the tools they need to navigate our democracy. And if there is any evidence... hang on a minute, Arif. Hang on a minute. I'm being heckled from both sides. And I've been asked a question. What I don't have is any evidence of any of the allegations that Paul just made. Now, you seem to be assuming that they're true. What I would say is, if there is evidence that there has been abuse, but if there is evidence that there was abuse, in this by-election, then a complaint ought to be made and it ought to be investigated. I just think it's bizarre that a political party that said that it was a referendum on Jeremy Corbyn, who've done so badly as a consequence, are now trying to claim that the reason that they lost was because of abuse in the electoral system. And yet they won't make a complaint about it.
Well, the other thing is...
It makes no sense at all.
You hang on, Paul, because the reality is this. There were 7,000 postal votes. Labour's majority was almost 11,000. Even if every single postal vote was corrupt in some way, which clearly wasn't the case, you would still have lost.
Yeah, of course. And no one's suggesting otherwise. What I'm saying is that the system is broken. Before 2000, you had to give a damn good reason why you had a postal vote. You were either in the army, you worked on the rigs, you were infirm, you were elderly. Now you've got postal vote on demand. And it's not... The Council for Europe have actually even said that this is open to fraud. Why aren't we doing something about it? Let's just go back to the old system.
Why haven't you put that before the Electoral Commission? I just don't understand it.
Or to the police.
You're that concerned. Why haven't you made a complaint?
And I'm not saying... By the way, I'm not saying that fraud has taken place in Oldham. I've never made that. I'm saying that the system is broken whereby a huge amount of people have actually voted in this election 10 days before or 7 days before. And there's a whole load of campaigning to go on up until election day.
That is the postal vote system.
But it's wrong.
OK. Rob, what does this say about Jeremy Corbyn? Is it a vote of confidence in the Labour leader?
Well, I wouldn't read too much into it in terms of views of Jeremy Corbyn. As I said, several other leaders did very well in early by-elections, did not go on to do so well in other broader electoral contests. What is clear is that there isn't a major Corbyn problem in a seat like Oldham. His vote went up. The Labour vote was very, very solid. And equally,
he's not as toxic as UKIP assumed.
No, he's not as toxic as UKIP, and indeed many in the national media assumed he might be. But equally, it may be the case that many voters who do have reservations about Jeremy Corbyn perhaps aren't at present willing to consider voting for UKIP as an alternative means of expressing their concerns.
Is it a vote of confidence in the Labour leader?
Well, I think what it shows is that where you have a very strong local candidate, where you have a party that is doubling its membership and is now the largest political party in the UK, that is talking about doing politics differently, and where you have an MP with a track record like Michael Meacher, that people understand that Labour is delivering for them. What I would say is that I think every parliamentary seat is different. We saw it at the last election. This was a great result for us in Oldham, make no mistake about it. Doesn't mean you can replicate it everywhere in the country, but what we do know is that what we can replicate is to have really good candidates working hand in hand with the National Party to mobilise, to organise and to get the vote out. That's what we did in Oldham, and if we do that elsewhere, I think we'll do well.
Do you regret branding Jeremy Corbyn as security threat, basing so much of your campaign on him?
Do you know what actually worked for Labour? And I was saying to Lisa earlier on the day, what worked on doorsteps is that people actually warmed to Jeremy Corbyn's principled stand over the bombing of Syria, and many people believe that he got absolutely right, and I actually believe Jeremy Corbyn's got this right and that we were wrong to vote in favour of bombing Syria.
OK.